Hey folks, this is session A with the Submergence Collective and their presentation entitled Scores for Restoration. Our guest speakers are Kaitlin, Bryson, Hollis, Mariko, and Rachel Zollinger. This will be recorded for archival purposes, and with that said, I will hand it over to the collective.
Should we go ahead and start, or should we wait a couple minutes?
It's up to you. You're more than welcome to start.
Okay. Well, we might go ahead and get started just in the essence of time. So first of all, welcome to Scores of Restoration by the Submergence Collective. This is an artist demo and a workshop. We're super pleased to have you all here and super honored to be able to speak to you. So the way that this session is going to go is first we're going to introduce ourselves individually and the Submergence Collective that we're a part of. We're going to explain the theoretical underpinnings of performance work for ecological restoration, which is what we're working with for this specific project. We'll give a brief overview of the history and context of using scores as a medium. We will talk a little bit about the importance and the urgency of relationship building and placemaking for ecological restoration. Then we'll move on to overview our specific work, Scores for Restoration, and then after that we'll be breaking into a workshop and then hopefully breakout sessions where we get to talk a little bit about some of the writing that we're gonna help you in generating today. So if you're someone who likes to type, that's great because you're probably already on a computer. If you're someone who likes to write, it'd be a good idea to grab a pen or pencil and a journal. Last note here is if you have any questions at all, please go ahead and put them in the chat box and then we'll do our best to address them at the end of the session. Okay, so we are Submergence Collective. We are an arts and ecology based group who works with everything from performance to scholarly writing. Our projects strive to imagine more collaborative, creative, hopeful, and ecologically connected futures for our human species and the rest of the living world. So going from left to right, we have Kaitlin Bryson, who's zooming in from Chumash, Kanva, and Keys ancestral lands in Los Angeles, California. She is currently trying to figure out how to live and work as an environmental artist while teaching at the University at Buffalo, New York, SUNY, and managing the UCLA Art Science Center. Next, we have Hollis Moore. Hollis is currently a landscape architecture master's student at UNM and also has an MFA, and she is currently zooming in from Sandia Pueblo land in the city of Albuquerque. Next is me, Mariko. I'm an independent scholar and instructor with a degree in environmental communication. I'm zooming in from Tiwa Native Lands in Taos, New Mexico. And last but not least, we have Rachel Zollinger. Rachel is currently a PhD student in art and visual culture education at UA, and she's currently zooming in from Dona Atham and Pascua Yaqui ancestral lands in Tucson, Arizona. All right, so we formed this collective as a way to practice collaborative ecological work while being able to facilitate, share, and continue to hone our art forms both individually and together as a group. A lot of the ethics that we have based our collective on stem from experiences that Hollis, Kaitlin, and Rachel had from the Land Arts program at the University of New Mexico. So if you attended Jen Hartman's presentation, she spoke a little bit about that program, which is a really wonderful world-making program. So like many, we sometimes feel really helpless and lost at the current state of national and international environmental affairs. But like any imbalance, addiction, or abusive situation, we believe that the harm to and disconnection from our living world, as seen by the sociocultural unrest and dire environmental issues, as of late, is a direct result of a lack of relationship and a lack of understanding. So our work aims to offer ways to collectively strive for understanding and constant intentional interaction with the living world. So work presented today and all work done by the Submergence Collective needs to be first work that is sustainable in nature and repeatable if possible. And this is in order to foster long-term potential relationships as opposed to singular moments or events of contact. And second, the work we make must be collaborative in some way. So we were strongly inspired by M. Beth Dempster's term sympoiesis, or as she explains it, collectively producing systems that do not have self-defined spatial or temporal boundaries, where information and control are distributed amongst components. Donna Haraway, another scholar who we work with her work quite a bit, adopted it as, quote, making with, as nothing makes itself. Sympoiesis is a word for worlding with, unquote, meaning it's this idea that we're constantly remaking and unmaking worlds. Additionally, our work relies heavily on Stacy Alamo's understanding of transcorporeality, and this is to help understand how humans are always intermeshed with all other material existences in our living world. So that was a little bit about us, who we are as a collective and individually. Next, Rachel is going to give you some of the theoretical context for how the specific project that we're doing situates performance work.
Okay, so the scores we will be exploring here today are what Della Pollock calls embodied creative counter-speech. We see this writing as doing, writing that tests and practices language in evocative, radical propositions and calls forth performative action. It is a way of becoming conscious of the medium, of considering the weight and materiality words carry in ourselves and in the living world. Performative words operate between consequential meaning and rhetorical aesthetic to project new modes of being and relating. Jean Baudrillard remarked that, quote, no one has advanced the hypothesis that things may discover us at the same time we discover them, and that there is a dual relationship in discovery, end quotes. Human beings are not the only ones capable of sensing and impressing change upon the world. We wonder about the agency of aspens and fungi and water and corks, and we wonder, how do we come into being through entangled interdependence? How do we come into knowing through distributed, decentralized practices? There is a persistent incapacity to think of things as they could be otherwise. The framings of our research, our thoughts, and indeed our actions discourage transcorporeality and intersubjectivity with the living world. We need a habit change in the ways we transform thoughts into actions and actions into thoughts. Writing made to perform offers us the possibility of changing through a co-performance of language and experience by acting on the edge of the capacities, our imagination, and our personhood. So next, Kaitlin will lead us into the history of scores as performative actions and the Fluxus movement. Kate, you're muted still.
Yeah. Classic Zoom. So I'm sure you've been wondering what this term scores means in the context of this art practice. And so we're using it, we're using the term score based off of the Fluxus movement, which was an international interdisciplinary community of artists, composers, designers, poets working in the 60s and 70s who were engaging in experimental art performances that were sort of based off of emphasizing the artistic process over the finished product. It was a neo-Dada form of expression that grew out of a reaction to happenings. And Fluxus artists were interested in breaking down the boundaries of who does art, eroding the performer, eroding the distinction of the performer and the observer, and thereby creating sometimes absurd and poetic gestures. One of the key concepts of the Fluxus movement was this idea of performative scores. So the performative methodology of the score dates back to the art practices of John Cage, Alan Capro, and Yoko Ono, just to name a few, who created these sort of performative events. The score-based performances are proposals, propositions, and instructions, providing the performer or participant with a set of circumstances to enact within their body. So these gestures merely provide a framework to be filled in and expanded by the performer, participant, and location. Here's an example of a score with photo documentation, which is sort of how we based our workbook off of as well. We take the idea of the score workbook further into the contemporary, into these sort of challenging times. focusing on the context of healing and creating regenerative and reciprocal actions done within the living world. And we do this as a practicum for relationship building, kinship forming, and nourishment to a damaged planet. Our scores follow the architecture of the Fluxus movement, but follow our own encrypted guidelines, prompting participants to engage specifically with place. So Hollis is going to talk now about how these scores are aimed at helping folks build relationships to place and why and how that's important.
All right, so why is it important that we engage with this work now? As mentioned earlier, we are living in a time of ecological imbalance, resulting in species extinction, environmental injustice, and climate disaster. Our state of the world is the result of Western objectification of nature. Because the living world is reduced to resource and capital, we have grown out of balance, addicted to lifestyles dependent on resource extraction. Many have been forced to erase cultural relationships with the living world. Others have forgotten or neglected it. Some haven't had the opportunity to visit with, make time for, or live within ecologies. As a collective, we bear witness to and lean into the grief of ecological destruction. We don't aim to leave you in despair, rather our work attends to the urgent and collective action of restoring relationships with the living world in order to resist unmendable climate destruction. As the planet heals, we too will heal. Robin Wall Kimmerer contextualizes the intentions of our practice in braiding sweetgrass. She says, quote, "Ecological restoration is inseparable from cultural and spiritual restoration, and is inseparable from the spiritual responsibilities of caregiving and world renewal. What if we could fashion a restoration plan that grew from understanding multiple meanings of land," end quote. We support restoration for renewed ecological function, but only if our relationships with the living world are also restored as part of this process. By making meaning with the living world through relationship building and kinship forming, this is the pressing work of our time. In order to nourish a damaged planet, we practice eco-cultural reflection, restoration, and reciprocity through performative writing. Now, Kaitlin will describe how our project Scores for Restoration embodies long-term relational restoration. She will also walk you through the process of creating your own scores so that you too can be part of this collective action.
So as I mentioned a little bit above, we follow the architecture of the Fluxus workbook and movement, but then we've kind of created our own sort of structure within that framework as well. So these are sort of the 4 tenets that we're working with in order to kind of help a body situate itself in place. So the first tenet is to observe, essentially. So imagine, speculate, and explore. What is, what could be, and what is known and unknown. The second action is to be offering something in return. So when we are considering as a collective that when you go into a place, into an environment, and if you're taking even qualitative information in or qualitative data, you're still sort of participating in this act of taking. And so we're interested in giving something back in return for that information or that knowledge. So the second tenet is remediation and reciprocity. What is an actionable craft, body engagement, or cooperative movement that can be given to this place in return? We also want to focus on these long-term gestures, and this really kind of results in the results in the process of returning. And so this one is about forthcoming, unfolding persistence, preparing for the not yet, and instigating for the future. And lastly, we, as has been mentioned sort of throughout the last few minutes, we're interested in this idea of making together and these symbiotic interactions. And so this one really kind of comes down to the fact that we wrote these scores as a collective. Each one of us wrote a score, and then another one of us performed that score and took documentation of it. So what we're hoping to do with you today is to create scores that we can all exchange with one another and participate with one another. And then again, sharing that connection of the process of making, and also kind of each allowing ourselves to have our own interpretation of one another's words and gestures. This is an example of one of the scores from our workbook, which will also link you to that at the end so you have a model. And so this is kind of how our spread is laid out in the workbook. This score is written by Rachel, and it's called Watch It Go. So I'll just read it. Chart the flow of water on the land. Squint. Where has it moved before? Where will it go next? Offer a seed to its wending path. Watch it go. So this score really puts you in place. It helps you you're watching, at least this is how I interpret this score. You're becoming involved in place by observing the way that water is moving. You're noticing a lot of ecological variations and also are involved in ecological sort of principles. And then not only that, your body is potentially participating within that movement of water. And then there's an act of reciprocation or reciprocity sort of given at the end. We're going to give one more example of a score. And I think Mariko is going to take over this one.
Yeah, hi. So this was another one we worked with. It was called Becoming Soil. It says, when you wake up, imagine you are crawling from a bed of soil. How would your life be different if you slept in soil? Go outside and try to find the best soil you can. Make note of why you think the soil you chose is the best. Put a good amount in a bucket and carry it with you for the day. Spread some soil on your neck and armpits for perfume. Dump some soil in your bathtub. Wash your face with some soil. Season your dinner with some soil. Give some soil to your lover or friend instead of a kiss. Give some soil to someone who really needs it. Take a nap in some soil. Soil your clothes. Really look at your fingernails. If you have any soil left, take it back to its home and thank it thoroughly. Consider visiting again tomorrow. So what we were working with here was recentering soil as a really important and present part of all of our lives, and trying to give it some of the attention and adoration that it deserves. And like the one that Kaitlin read, the idea of this is that you repeat it constantly. And it becomes this continuous ritual to recenter soil, recenter soil, recenter soil. All right. So now we're going to move on to the more workshop-y portion of this, and we are going to start with a free write. So if you have a pen and paper, pull that out or pull up a Word document. And for those of you who have not done free writes before, the idea of a free write is that you just completely relax your brain. We're going to give you some prompts to read over to help hopefully bring some thoughts in if you don't really have a direction that you want to go already in writing a score. And right now, the idea is just to get words on paper, feelings on paper, images or sensations about connecting to the living world on paper. And the next part of the workshop will be to actually build it into a score. So go ahead and take 5 minutes of just time to yourself, and we'll let you know when to come back together. Look at these prompts, remember not to self-edit, and just try to write. So go ahead and start trying to wrap up your thoughts. Okay, and when you're ready, come back and join this Zoom group. All right. So the second part of this exercise is going to be to look at some of the things that you have written, and they're likely jumbled, maybe a couple sensory things, maybe a couple memories. And if you have a couple of words or a sentence or a paragraph or a thought or an image that you specifically are feeling really drawn to when you look at your page, circle that or highlight it if you're on a computer. And this next section is going to be taking a few more minutes to yourself to try to take that image or memory or word or phrase and turn it into something that could potentially be performed. So if you're feeling a little lost about that, think about adding action words to a way to interact with that memory, thought, part of the living world, whatever it is. So think visit or smell or touch or think or hug or lean on or things like that. And we recognize this is not a lot of time, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just try to work with some small corner of what you have. And then after this, we're going to break into groups so we can discuss how this process went for you a little bit. All right, so go ahead and take another 4 to 5 minutes. take about another minute. All right, we're gonna go ahead and come back together for just a second. Okay, good job, first of all, I'm sure. And this next part is going to have us broken into smaller groups for just a few minutes. And I don't want you to feel nervous or scared or like these need to be perfect by any means. This idea of constantly making is kind of what we go with. But in smaller groups, we'd love it if you discussed how this process went for you, what it felt like, where you maybe ran into roadblocks, where you really felt like you got a flow. And if you feel called to, we'd love it if you shared some of your scores with each other.
So Gia, could you help us break out into 2 breakout rooms?
2 breakout rooms, perfect. Okay,
Thank
give
you.
me a second.
While that's happening, how long do we have time to be in smaller groups?
You have until 2:20, so 15 minutes.
All right, should we do like 7 minutes in small groups?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for timing.
Okay.
I teach art museum education.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right now?
So sorry to interrupt. There are some folks that are not active. They're not like joining. So this, I don't know if you just want, I mean, because there's like 2 artists in here and Dr. DeCindio. Is that
I
okay?
know.
I mean,
Is the other group have a couple people in it or no?
technically 2 active people and then, 2 of your artists, but then
Okay.
other folks are not active in both rooms.
Maybe we should just do it all together. That's not really a lot.
Sure. Yeah. Do you want to lead that, Kaitlin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll bring everyone to the main room.
Okay.
In that case, Dr. DeCindio, what did you end up getting to write a little bit? Or
I
you-
did.
How vibe? Where are you at?
Don't judge me. I was thinking about how the only place I really like to be outdoors is near the ocean. So I focused on where I like to be outdoors. And so I wrote about going to the ocean and how I've never lived near the ocean, but that almost the ritual of going is really important to me. And so I don't know if that would change if I did actually live near there.
No, yeah, I agree. That's interesting. So that's the place where you feel like most comfortable outside, or is it that you just feel the most like in relation to?
I think probably both.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like I find myself going when I'm there, I want to be outside and I want to be in it. And I don't really feel like that anywhere else. Yeah.
Which ocean? Is it the Pacific?
I'm from the East Coast, but lately it's been the Pacific because of access.
What about, does anyone else want to share what they wrote or like what you're thinking about?
I can share.
Thank you.
I wrote about the trash islands in the middle of the ocean.
Okay.
And mermaids.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm really intrigued with the mermaid thing. Is there like a line you can read us about mermaids or what you were specifically thinking about?
I don't know. I don't know if there's anything I feel super excited about reading yet, but yeah. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about princesses too. So yeah, that's all.
Right on.
I came to this breakout group a little late. Something happened with the other breakout room. So I think we're a big group, or is this just us? Anyways, I love free writing. I don't do it enough. Probably the last time I did it was in a guided thing like this. It works every time. That's all.
Awesome. Well, since our session has gotten smaller, I feel like since we started the workshop part, collective members, did you have anything you wanted to share? And then alternatively, those of you who are still with us, did you have any questions about the process or our specific project?
I would love to hear more of these scores and prompts and other examples. I don't know if you could share.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of them.
I could share the workbook, and then maybe Rachel, you could follow up with some of the, because you've written a few more since we did the.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's best, like, I don't know if I could put one in a chat or something like that. I don't know about all of you, but I tend to be a visual person, and so I like to see words, not just hear them.
Rachel, can you screen share perhaps also for our audiences for the recording?
Yeah, hold on one sec. Let me open a file then.
I can download or put the PDF in here too, Rach, if that's quicker.
Sure.
Coming. 1 second. There it is.
Sorry, my computer is like screaming right now.
Blast off the fan.
Zoom is slowly killing my computer.
I know. Me too.
Since my computer is struggling right now, I saw a few other of you furiously writing. Hollis or Kaitlin, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Hollis, do you want to go for it first?
Sure. I was writing, this was really nice to have some space for free writing also. And I'm really grateful to have members of this collective who encourage that practice because I don't do it all the time by myself. I don't have any like consolidated scores, but I think someone in this group was also talking about how they feel super connected to water, and I do as well. And so often when I'm walking, I imagine what else is a water vessel in the desert, because I can't normally come across a river or ocean that I can fully submerge into. So it makes me feel more connected to imagine like plants and animals and even soil as vessels for water. So we're starting to write about a walk in which one would take note of various water vessels in the landscape and then turn their body into the shape of that vessel.
That's great, Hollis.
That's really nice. I'm looking forward to doing that score.
I know.
Also, being prompted to go on a walk in the desert is really nice.
Yeah. This was, I agree with you, Hollis, and you as well. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Andrew.
Andrew, okay. Yeah, it was really cool to have the space to do this. And even though we like have done this project several times, I think just, yeah, having the practice of free writing, I got a little bit of time to think. I have a friend who's visiting from Oregon, and her like whole neighborhood burned down in the Ashland fires. And so I was thinking about that, and some of my thoughts were about like how amazing fire is in like a joyous way, like when you think of like birthday candles and wood stoves and like matches and incense and all these lovely things, and then also like the incredible pain and waste that fire, when it's not respected well, can cause. And so I was thinking about some kind of score that allows people to like go to a tree that has survived a fire, because you know you can so often see in the bark that it's like been through a couple things, and kind of just give it a blessing for having withstood and hopefully withstanding.
So this is a score that Kaitlin, I think, wrote, and then Hollis enacted it. So those of you who are familiar with New Mexico, and especially the Albuquerque area, you might know that there's a pretty intricate acequia system. And so Hollis lives within that area. And I don't know, Paul, if you want to talk more about your relationship with, as you're talking about water, your relationship with this particular acequia that you are near on a near daily basis.
Yeah, it's a place that I visit almost definitely every day, sometimes 2 times a day. So for this project, I documented the water flowing through it through a week in the morning and evening. And it changes drastically. It's almost like a man-made tide determined by like who's getting water and who's getting water when.
Yeah, and again, if you're familiar with the acequia system, you know, it's an ancient engineering of the water in the desert. But what's really so fascinating about this is that you can see from the picture on the lower right, is that even with these man-made, human-engineered hydrologies, there's these ecologies that kind of become dependent on this. And becomes its own space that is completely dependent on these, as Hollis was saying, like almost like a tide of water that moves through there. And in fact, like they're being earthen channels. They are almost never lined with concrete.
Can I ask a question about performance of scores? What like this is a great composition exercise. What advice do you have about performing scores, say with a group, a class group or some other group?
I'll jump in on this question. So actually the creation of the workbook, the Fluxus workbook, which we gave as a resource, it should be linked wherever the resources are. That's actually really good. It's a really good model. And it's something that I've always done with my classes. I've taught art and ecology, and this is usually an assignment that we do within the class. And there's like, it's a whole gamut of things. So you can do like an independent score if someone isn't feeling super like confident and not really wanting to perform in front of the group. So there could be these like solo gestures that are done that, you know, a person can use their iPhone or whatever, smartphone or any sort of like camera documentation if they want to take a picture of it. If not, I also have encouraged students to just write about what their experience was, like write or draw, if they're not interested in documenting it with like a phone. But then there's also opportunities, like one of my favorite, I can't remember, I think it was Alan Capro who wrote this score where everyone is sitting in the audience and you have like a big giant ball of yarn and everyone has to get tied up to one another. Obviously, I'm thinking about the COVID restrictions of this piece now, so it wouldn't be possible to do it now, but it's a really fun class activity that's like a really great icebreaker. And so you're performing and it's kind of, again, like this absurd thing. Another one is to like everyone takes off their shoes and switches shoes and has to walk around in someone else's shoes, even if they're too big or too small. And yeah, so there's these kind of like collaborative group actions that can happen, or there are independent actions. And so we wanted to create this workbook and set, like, again, to kind of just like help get people comfortable with performing. And I would say that most of our scores are all like kind of geared towards an independent, like relationship forming with the living world and not necessarily with another human. So yeah.
I had a question about the role of ritual in all of this, because I'm thinking about like Yoko Ono's work and some of the other Fluxus artists, and I was wondering if you've had experiences where some of these scores and performing some of these scores have become a part of your artistic practices or your daily life. You know, how has this influenced you long term?
I feel like Hollis could answer that because almost the water score was very much like a ritual, became a ritual.
I think I'm so sorry. If you could repeat the question one more time.
Sure. So I was thinking about the role of ritual in all of this. And I even my free writing, it kind of came out, but I was wondering how performing these scores has impacted you long term, if any of it has become a part of your artistic practices or just your daily life.
I think some of the scores, we are hoping for that to happen definitely. And Rachel, if we have time, it looks like it's about to end. We'll talk a little bit about how we are making a public space where everyone can share their scores. So maybe part of the ritual is like checking into that space and seeing what other people have posted and engaging with those practices. For me, yeah, performing all of these scores makes a lot of meaning for me and does deeply connect me to place. So I do think that we hope for all of these actions to be like long-term relationship building rituals with the living world.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. This is such a great way to even just like end our emerging conversations. I invite everyone, if you're around, to continue chatting and these conversations within our happy hour, which is starting in 10 minutes. Thank you all. I'm gonna stop recording and I'll see you all later.
Thank you.